Hello and welcome to Diminishing Returns Easter Special.
Ooh.
I'm Calvin, and with me are Alan.
Ban this sick filth.
And Saul.
Easter! Yay! Jesus!
Yeah.
Easter's cancelled. Easter Bunny is on quarantine.
Quite right, I say. Yeah. I think the Easter egg market is really suffering. Unless we're completely off, and by the time this recording actually goes out, everyone will be frolicking in the meadows, touching each other, spitting on each other, and everyone's all healthy and fine.
Yeah.
Well, why are we talking about Life of Brian, actually?
Because of democracy, Calvin.
They won the Patreon vote.
Ah, well, in that case, we have some of the very best Patreon supporters going, by my estimation. I'm very pleased that this film was selected out of, well, what was second and third place in the vote? I have no idea what else was on offer.
It was it came down to a very, very narrow decision. There was only one vote in it, and both got more votes than things typically get to be chosen for an episode. So,
well, what was it against, though? What was the second place? Was it God Is Not Dead 12 or something?
Yeah. God Is Not Dead 3. God's Not Dead 3.
Oh, really? Oh,
yeah,
right.
Light Up the Light, or whatever. What was it called? God's Not Dead 3? It had a stupid name. God's Not Dead, A Light in Darkness.
Oh. Right, anyway. So we're talking about Life of Brian, which is, I believe, the first time we've probably had the excuse to talk about Monty Python on this podcast.
Oh,
yeah.
Who needs an excuse, eh?
Is that a quote?
Yeah, when you're talking about Monty Python, everything is a quote.
Right.
We're the knights.
Well, I think we should lay our...
Who say nay?
We should...
Oh,
it's
just a flesh wound.
We should
Rodney,
lay our cards on the table and sort of say where we stand when it comes to Monty Python in general, because I think I will probably end up being the biggest fan on this podcast. I've seen every episode of Monty Python's Flying Circus.
Yeah.
I've seen all their films. I saw them live at the London O2 in, I think it was 2015, 2016, whenever they did their One Down, Five to Go.
Was that good?
Reunion
watching
tour.
him repeat stuff they did in the 60s again.
You know, I mean, yeah, obviously they're just doing a lot of the same stuff over again, but you don't necessarily go for that. I think there is a certain, perhaps sadness as well as charm to seeing these old men reunite and Terry Gilliam's like hanging 60 feet in the air on a wire doing these silly things.
It's like going to see the Rolling Stones, isn't it? You know, you don't want them to do their new material.
Well, yeah, but at least they're still putting out new material. I think that's the difference. They are still recording music.
Yeah, but no one cares. They just want to hear Brown Sugar and whatnot, and Satisfaction and...
Paint It Black.
I think there's a difference between hearing a song performed live and going through a sketch, you know. I don't know. I mean, I went to see the League of Gentlemen when they did their tour a couple of years back, and that was a baffling experience because it was like they'd get 2 words into a sketch and there'd be a wave of applause across the audience as everyone seemed to recognise the sketch immediately, and not from like a well-known phrase, just from like, "So, how are we?" or something like that. Everyone would be like, "Way!" And it was like, what are you doing? And then they were just doing sketches from like series 1 and 2, and it was like, what? I thought they were going to do some new shit.
Yeah, to bring this back to Monty Python, I went to see Spamalot a few years ago, and my coming away from that was like, yeah, that was sort of fine, enjoyable, but it felt like watching people do Monty Python sketches. It's like, you know, when you're just with someone who's a Monty Python fan, and they just do the dead parrot sketch like from memory.
Yeah,
it's like, oh yeah, that's really good, well done. But it was like that, but they're all on a stage doing this Monty Python material. It's like, yeah, I remember seeing that material in a film. Yeah.
I listened to a story from Dino Stamatopoulos, or whatever his name is. He's a comedy writer, about when he met Eric Idle recently. Basically, this guy went to a party at Eric Idle's house, was the big Monty Python guy, like, not being cool about it, just asking him loads of questions about the Rootles. And it got to the point that apparently Eric Idle sort of snapped at him and was just like, "Man, you're living in the past. just stop living in the past at him and got really angry. And then they'd been drinking and so on. And he apparently was like incensed at that. Like, I'm living in the past. You haven't had an original thought in 20 years. Spam a lot. And like lost it at him. And they just like blew up at each other. And then things got really awkward. But apparently, and why it's really sad, Eric Idle took him in the kitchen a bit later to have like a little chat. And he got really sad and just went like, I've just not had a single wave of inspiration since Python.
I bought my mansion.
For the last 3 decades. I just feel like I'm just repeating myself. And apparently he seemed really sad about it. And to kind of make up for everything, as like a token of goodwill, he gave him a signed DVD of Spamalot. But yeah, I think it's very sad because Eric Idle obviously cares, and then the flip side of that is obviously John Cleese, who couldn't give less of a shit, just happy to rehash the same old shit.
Yeah, I heard something about Spamalot where it might have been Terry Jones had said like, yeah, Spamalot, it's not very Python, but it is very Eric Idle. And they were basically just sort of saying, yeah, he's just rehashing his old shit. And Eric Idle said, yeah, well, they never mentioned that when they cashed the checks for the millions that we made on it.
Well, he's always been the more entrepreneurial one of the group. Like, he was the one who sort of raised funding for Life of Brian, and he's more of the money man, perhaps, than the other
Eric
ones.
Idle you're talking about.
Who's your favourite one? Calvin, it's obviously John Cleese.
Well,
I like Sporty Python.
I couldn't cope without either John Cleese, Terry Jones, or Michael Palin in Monty Python, is where I stand.
I couldn't tell any of them apart from John Cleese and Eric Idle. The rest are all just like old Oxbridge type, like 1960s Oxbridge type comedy. Do you know, like Monty Python, I want to hate it because it's just, it's the comedy that like your girlfriend's dad thinks is really funny. It's the comedy that like
it is funny.
It's comedy that like an old university professor who still snorts snuff thinks is really fun to sit there and quote whilst drinking a large rosé in an old man pub. It's just, there's just a certain kind of person who still thinks it's acceptable to sit in the pub and quote The Knights Who Say Knee.
Funnily enough, when I was watching this, I was thinking, this feels like the sort of thing that Calvin would find funny. And I suppose I was relating that to our Laurel and Hardy discussion. And one of the things I really noticed watching Life of Brian, and may I say, like, my memory, I haven't watched it for a few years, but memory of it is that it's a great film, And watching it today, what I really came away with was I did not laugh at all. I didn't even titter. And I guess
Really?
I'm familiar with the material. There's no sort of sense of newness there, so maybe that's an element. But I think, like Laurel and Hardy, when we talked about that, this feels like something that I respect rather than enjoy. I think you have to put it through this filter of this film's 40 years old, but even this was quite late in Python career. Like this, the influence they had and what they were doing that was different. It's difficult to see it now without looking through a lens.
I always remember disliking Python more than I actually do, and I kind of go into stuff like Life of Brian wanting to hate it, and then I sit down and watch it, and it's like, no, it is actually quite good. Like, I can't really like it's, but it's because it's so overplayed and overquoted, and it's become too mainstream, and it's also just like you say, it's very basic by modern standards. It's set the tone for comedy for the following 40 or so years. Not all of it works. It's quite hit and miss, but a lot of it is actually top quality, certainly for the 70s sketch comedy. And I do take issue with the Python's film output for perhaps a lack of things beyond the sketch comedy quality within them. But yeah,
Yeah, no, I quite agree. And I mean, I think that this is obviously their most narrative film.
Yes.
So I think bear that in mind as well. I mean, there is a character who sort of runs through it. There is that in the Holy Grail as well, but the Holy Grail is much more stop and start, right? We're in a sketch now.
It's also much more overtly comedic and sort of silly, which is what Pythons do. This feels like, less. I know it has its moments with the spaceship and all that, but they really feel out of place within this.
Yeah.
This feels like they didn't quite settle one way or the other, or maybe they should have. But yeah, it's definitely much more narrative, and I think it's less overtly funny, but it's definitely more satirical. It's really making points rather than just trying to make gags.
And that's the thing. It's just annoying because on the surface of it, you are all individual. Yes, we're all individual. I'm not. That's a great, intelligent gag followed by another gag which undercuts it. Like, that should be hilarious, but like my stepdad will just quote that at the dinner table, and so it's just completely neutered when I sit and watch the film now. And it's not the film's fault. It's a victim of its own. I think
that's exactly the experience I had when I watched it today, and it was the same with the what have the Romans ever done for us bit, which is really works nicely. But I've heard it so many times, and it's been parodied so many times. It's lost all its impact, and obviously we were aware of the cultural impact this film had at the time in terms of people considering it blasphemous and stuff like that. And that just doesn't play anymore. Like, it certainly doesn't play to me. And I don't think it does to the public in general, because we're much more secular as a society. And it loses its bite with that.
I think Life of Brian is very much the sweet spot where it was kind of them all firing on to the best of their abilities. And it's that right balance between a bit of narrative to carry you through it and the sketches. And I think that it does fall prey to feeling more like a sketch show than a story. And if anything, I still kind of get a bit bored with it in the third act, because it's like, right, there's not really enough narrative to keep me going here. But for what it's doing, I think it's a very good job of it.
I think there's something that works in Life of Brian's favour is that it obviously has a target. It is, making fun of organised religion, and it's a satire, and it's commenting on that. And it was only when I rewatched the making of on the Blu-ray that it sort of occurred to me, oh yeah, God, this really was a thing of its day. Like, it was really super controversial, and it's weird watching that now because it seems so gentle as a religious satire.
Yeah.
There is the satire of religion, but it's not a satire of faith. It's not a satire of belief or of Jesus specifically. Certainly they claim. Yeah, and there's a very specific scene that succinctly shows this, where they're going, oh, the shoe, we must follow the shoe. No, we must take off our shoes. No, the holy God. They sum it up in that one little sketch, like, oh, look, religion just divides on these pointless little inanities. That's it. That's your satirical scene.
Oh God, the whole plot point built around the people. What is it? The People's Front of Judea, the Judean People's Front, all that. That again, it's that same thing.
That's not mocking religion. That's mocking the politics of the time, or certainly the sort of
it's mocking the dogma behind it. Yeah,
and having a character say, "Make up your own minds. Don't do what they tell you to." It's pretty on the nose. Like, they're not exactly hiding the message here, but it's okay because it works within the context, and you couldn't just. You couldn't take a swipe at Jesus. Like, you see, like the controversy they had anyway, when they were quite gentle. Shall we talk a bit more specifics about the plot? We start with baby Jesus.
I remember watching this as a kid, not a massively young kid, and just, I think it was this, I think a friend of mine had gone on about how funny it was, and I taped it off the TV. And I remember just sitting in, starting to watch it, and just being like, "What is this shit? Because I don't think I'd ever seen Monty Python before, and it was just, I don't know, it's not the funniest opening scene, is it? And you're immediately presented with a rat bag woman! You!
I love Terry Jones as Brian's mother. He's brilliant. Love it. Doing that classic Monty Python voice.
Yeah, I must say, I'm a big fan of the Monty Python school of portraying a woman.
Yeah.
If you're
as
a man.
Even wear, he doesn't even wear a wig or anything or shave. It's like he's got 5 o'clock shadow for like most of it. But I think it's fantastic.
Who are you?
We are 3 wise men.
What?
We are 3 wise men.
Well, what are you doing creeping around a car shed at 2 o'clock in the morning? That doesn't sound very wise to me.
So yeah, we get a little sketch about gold, frankincense, and myrrh. What's myrrh and that old thing.
Mm.
It's pretty. Again, it just seems a bit like obvious now, but fair enough.
Well, this is it, because this is they weren't doing that kind of thing back then.
Yeah, I guess so.
Thing that they were targeting were those biblical epics, and we've looked at Ben-Hur, and I watched 10 Commandments for this podcast, but I think even for that episode, and they call those out as inspiration of just sort of like even just the notion of like you have this biblical epic, and people just talk normally, as opposed to in the way that Charlton Heston delivered every line, like it's all very, like people seem to know that what they were saying was super important in all of those films, because they were aware of the gravitas, whereas it's like, oh yeah, actually no, there was just like a Messiah fever around the Middle East at that time, and there were many different prophets, messiahs, religions popping up, and I like that they just take the attitude of like, oh yeah, just have them talk normally.
I agree as well, because it is hard to appreciate a lot of it, because like you say, it does feel so basic and overplayed and obvious now, but the things I really like watching this film are largely much smaller little moments and details. So for example, that scene when the mum's like, oh, thanks very much for the frankincense and the gold. Don't worry so much about the myrrh next time. Like that little line at the end there is really funny. Like it's a really nice little underplayed. But I think it's because that "don't worry so much about the myrrh next time" line hasn't been quoted to death. So it's that still has a bit of power, as if it were brand new for me.
This is more about the kinds of people that you hang out with, Saul. You're just around people who quote these things endlessly. I don't know who these people are. Is it me? Is it me who's with those people?
Yeah. It is a thing. I mean, God, that Simpsons episode from 20 years ago where Homer goes and hangs around with the nerds at college and they all start quoting Monty Python was, that was calling this behaviour out 20 years ago.
We are the knights who say, Neek!
Neat.
Anyway, it is also in this opening that, I mean, the gag is that the 3 wise men went to the wrong manger, basically, and they go out, and then we see Jesus, and Jesus appears after the title sequence as well. Handled very sort of like, Mary and Joseph are there. They have the sort of the glowing halos around them. They do actually treat that with some reverence.
Well, that's just spoofing how it's done in other movies, isn't it? Even that, I don't think it's done
I don't know
that.
If it's spoofing. It's not making a joke out of the fact that they have these heavenly halos and the 3 wise men go up. I mean, obviously it's undercut by Terry Jones slapping the baby in the next shot, but they're not making fun of Mary, Joseph, and Jesus.
No, but they're kind of saying, what if in that serious portrayal of the nativity that you're familiar with, this was going on in the background. So they're sort of trying to play that one element as sincere as possible so that the other stuff is funny by juxtaposition.
Well, I do also wonder if that was a conscious thing to try and avoid legislation in the behind-the-scenes stuff. They talk about blasphemy law is still. Is it still a thing here in England? But there was a case, and the editor of a gay magazine got locked away or fined or something like that because he allowed the publication of a poem from the perspective of a Roman guard who was watching Jesus die on the cross and got turned on by it or something. And he got, prosecuted for blasphemy, which was the first time in a long time that law had been. But Mary Whitehouse was a big thing around this time as well. So there's the opening credit sequence, which is the only bit of sort of your classic Monty Python animation that makes it in here.
Yeah.
For the most part, completely illegible. I feel bad for anyone who was counting on their name appearing on the screen, because so much of it is like, oh god, it's really hard to see.
It's the best Bond theme that we had up until 1979, isn't it?
I did think that was a weird choice. Rather than doing some kind of hymn, they have this sort of, very James Bond, Shirley Bassey song.
The babe they called Brian, he grew and grew up to be a boy called Brian.
You think, because they're mocking, well, like, obviously the title thing is Ben-Hur graphics, and they're mocking this kind of historical biblical epic thing, but they do a Bond theme. Doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, it's odd, isn't it? I don't really get it. But anyway, and then the film proper begins, and it's however many 30 odd years later, and the baby Brian has grown up, and it's sort of we have sort of a couple of sketches to sort of settle us in for the rest of the film. I think there's a whole thing here with Jesus delivering a sermon on the mount, and there's a bunch of people arguing at the back because they can't hear and they're misinterpreting what he's saying. Blessed are the cheesemakers and all that.
I think Eric Idle is pretty firmly my favourite one of the Pythons, and it's just because his...
God.
I just find his delivery... Well, firstly, he's the songwriter, and the songs are such a big part of what I get out of Monty Python. So that's a big part of it. But shelving that for 1 second, just the basic delivery of it, like that whole bit, I wouldn't have found remotely funny were it not for his performance just being a dickhead, just being like, "Oh, fuck off, big nose! Shut up, you little big nose!" Oh, you know.
Yeah, actually, I can see why that appeals to your soul.
Well, yeah, everyone else is just being very like, "Oh, please do be quiet. Oh no. Oh, what is going on? Really now?" And it's like, okay, great. But he's actually bringing a bit of spark and energy.
But I think that's Eric Idle's characters tend to be like that. I mean, that character continues throughout. When he's being crucified and all that.
Yeah, I love it. That's my favorite.
A very strong character in the whole thing. Yeah, I think Eric Idle is a distinctly comedy actor, where you've got Graham Chapman playing things pretty straight, which I think is quite necessary. I think it's nice to have that kind of focus down the middle. And like John Cleese never goes very big. Like he's always just John Cleese. For
the most part, yeah. I mean, he
doesn't.
As
opposed to say, even Michael Palin can do a character. Terry Jones can only do, "Oh, hello, I'm your mum." But that's
John Cleese can go big, though. He can go very big as John Cleese. I don't think you see much of it in this film.
No, the biggest he goes is as that priest at the stoning scene.
Yeah, absolutely. But in the sketch show, didn't he play? Was he called Mungo, Calvin? That chef who just would walk around smashing mice with a mallet. Like John Cleese would go quite big, and obviously Basil Fawlty was a very big performance as well.
But I do know what Alan means. In this film, the biggest he does go is the high priest, because otherwise he's the centurion and Reg, the head of the sort of very left-wing political group.
Yeah.
The thing about Eric Idle in this is that I think that, Terry Gilliam was never really an actor in the group anyway, so I don't know if I really count him. But the other ones, like Graham Chapman is obviously your lead, Terry Jones is a big part, he has that mother role, which is quite big. Michael Palin, Pontius Pilate, John Cleese is, I think, both the Centurion and Reg. Eric Idle is the one who feels the most bit playery out of all of them, and I think he probably ends up playing more characters than the others as a result.
But the thing is, he plays the one character throughout. the sort of cheeky chappy, but
Yeah.
because he becomes in bits, it's like it could be a different character. You know what I mean? Like but yeah, then he is playing it the same way. Oh yeah, it's the same guy from earlier. Yeah.
So there are a few sketches going on in the opening. There's the stuff on the Sermon on the Mount, and then there's this big stoning scene, which is very much a sketch about the women can't go, so they're buying counterfeit beards, and John Cleese is this very schoolmasterly high priest, and none of that ever really comes back again. I think a lot of the rest of the film, it feels like, recurring characters, having a skit about something, like Graham Chapman's trying to buy a beard and the guy's trying to make him haggle and that kind of stuff. Whereas in the first 20 minutes or so, there is some stuff that feels quite detached from everything that comes after.
Yeah, and I'm not a big fan of that.
Yeah, I kind of took that, about, I don't know, I guess 40 minutes in or something, it was like, oh, this is finally kicking in. When they sort of go, oh, you're the Messiah, once that all starts, it feels like the film actually gets going. Because before that, it did just feel a bit too bitty and sketchy. Yeah,
and it's weird because
it does plod a bit with this whole left-wing movement that he gets involved in. I think because they have some kind of plan to break into Pontius Pilate's place, and then Brian is incarcerated. And there's enough funny stuff happening here to entertain me. I like Michael Palin being the sort of Yorkshireman style guy who's chained up in the dungeon, and he's like, oh, you don't know how lucky you've got it, and all that kind of stuff. But I agree that I think it really does kick off when people start calling him the Messiah, and that whole scene where they're chasing him around and misinterpreting what he's doing. He comes across the naked hermit. I love all that stuff. My favorite bit of the film.
I it's weird because I think when there's a bit more plot attached to it, it just makes it better. Like the whole scene where it's very much a protracted sketch where he gets the grammar wrong on his Latin graffiti, and then John Cleese comes out and makes him write it out 100 times. That's very much like a little tangent, a sketch, but it's very organically woven into the plot as a plot point, which justifies it and makes it feel much better and something I like far more than the stoning scene, which, completely removed from context. The stoning scene is basically as funny, I would say. They're about the same, but the stoning scene's irrelevant, so it just kind of annoys me because it's not progressing anything. And
I like the stoning scene. Just because I like John Cleese being angry schoolmaster.
Do you not prefer him being an angry schoolmaster Roman, correcting his grammar?
No, I like the ridiculous costume he has on, and the facial hair adds to it as well.
I know what you're saying though, Sol. Yeah, I think I agree. If you can weave them into the plot, then it feels so much sleeker and cleaner. Yeah, definitely.
Should we talk about this alien bit? Because that's quite I watched this with my partner who hadn't seen it before, and he was chuckling at bits. It kept his attention throughout, but then when that happened, he was like, wait, what is going on? And then he sort of just accepted it and whatever. But it is a really weird, I guess Star Wars was a thing a couple of years ago.
I mean, to be honest with you,
know.
In the context of the Monty Python's sketch stuff, it totally makes sense. They did that stuff all the time. It's like, oh, we haven't got a punchline, so let's just make someone run through, and then there's a lumberjack, and he starts singing.
Someone bursts through a wall, and a foot stamps on them, an anvil's dropped on their head.
Yeah. In this film, they're going for a more narrative structure, and this is particularly one big outlier. I guess it feels like they were like, got to give Terry Gilliam something to do. He keeps calling. He says, "Why aren't we asking him to do it?"
I think that's it, though. I genuinely think it feels very much like they're like, look, we're Monty Python. We make eclectic, crazy stuff. Yeah. This film is falling into a trap of being a bit too grounded for a Monty Python production because of what we're doing with it. How can we inject a bit of zany energy into it and give Terry Gilliam something to do? And I think it is born out of that, and whether or not it works or was the right decision, I don't know, but I can completely understand what led them to do it. And it is ultimately like
Yeah.
30 seconds of screen time, isn't it? So
Yeah, I agree. I do think it works less now than it did then, probably. But yeah, if you're a Monty Python fan, you're going to see a Monty Python film, that's not going to particularly be that weird, is it? But yeah, I don't like it.
I like it because they have that camp man who's just like, oh, you lucky bastard.
Yeah, that was
I think
great.
that's nice. Yeah. Yeah, and then there's really... do you want to talk about the left-wing group at all? There's some stuff in here now which is sort of like... I remembered all the stuff with Eric Idle wanting to be known as Loretta and
Yeah.
his rights to be a woman, all that kind of stuff. That felt very like, oh, that's really
Yeah.
current.
There's quite a few things here that were like, yeah, this is really quite ahead of its time.
Yeah.
And the weird thing about that is it feels like it's supposed to be kind of poking fun at left-wing sort of liberalism. Because I think what they're trying to do is satirizing how liberal they are. But now, looking back at it, it's like, oh, compared to stuff you usually see from the 70s, this feels like very on trend and like current.
Yeah.
Because they're so kind of accepting of it. And they just try and get on with it by 70s standards. But I don't know, was that a joke?
No,
were they
definitely.
satirizing that idea? Or were they just being nice?
I think it was poking fun at just like these groups. Like, I mean, it felt like Jeremy Corbyn supporters. To be honest, there's a lot of motions and votes on motions, and motions on votes on motions, and all that kind of stuff, and without anything actually getting done.
Yeah,
and a lot of like, oh God, we hate the Romans. What have they ever done for us? And it's like, oh well, actually, they've done a lot of stuff. So yeah, and I guess all of that was around in the 70s. A lot of trade unions and that kind of stuff. A lot of bodies that never actually, got things done. But this group is important because it introduces Judith into the story, and her relationship with Brian is supposed to be a plot point, or it's certainly a drive for him to try and get into this group. That always feels very underdeveloped.
It does, doesn't it? Yeah. Maybe that's another Bond reference. It feels... yeah, that whole thing just feels really weirdly dropped in. Like, why do they hook up? And she's not really developed as a character, and it's not Terry Jones in a wig. I don't know. I'm not quite sure what they were trying to do with that. Maybe that was like, oh, let's try and do like a sincere, what you would do as a kind of romantic subplot, but then subvert it by having them naked, like really overtly naked, and that's kind of unusual. Maybe that's it. Is that...
I've no idea what her full frontal nudity is about, or his actually. Like Graham Chapman is completely nude in this.
Well, the good thing about that, obviously, that bit is like he opens the windows and then everyone's staring at him. It's like it's the classic you feel naked in front of a crowd thing, right?
Yeah.
Plus, it's as a visual thing, it's very like, whoa, I can see his cock and balls, and a cock and balls is innately comedic, as we all know. So that's funny. Then she's just naked and wandering around. And weirdly, like, her hair is obviously taped to her breasts so that they don't show. But then she's completely bottomless. So I don't know if that's a joke or not, the idea of not showing nudity, but then the rest of us nude as well. I don't know. I don't know if I'm giving him too much credit there. Because it certainly doesn't play in the scene.
No, that's true. It's true. I don't know if this actress is necessarily that good. Maybe it's just the part is written and directed. I don't know, but she does like this whole angry sort of student union thing throughout, and that's really her only thing. I don't even really understand how she ends up falling for Brian, because it's only after everyone is chasing him around thinking he's the Messiah that there's a scene that ends with just the reveal of her saying Brian, and then they're in bed together all of a sudden, and I don't know why.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of all that. It feels like something got cut from the film, frankly. I don't know if that's the case or not, but...
Well, I don't know about that. Well, a lot of things got cut, but they also put out a lot of deleted scenes, and there's nothing in them that would suggest that. Yeah.
Well, she's not a particularly funny or comedic character, so maybe they just thought we're only going to put out deleted scenes that are like self-contained jokes. rather than plot stuff. I don't know. Going back to the nudity as well, I wouldn't say it's like remotely sexualized nudity, which is kind of unusual. It's just very matter of fact. So, I mean, I don't even know if it's meant to be all that funny beyond the basic joke of, like you say, oh, he's exposed in front of an entire crowd.
But no, when she's running around naked...
No, I know. I don't think there's any real gag to it.
It's not funny. It's certainly not sexualized. I mean, the only gag is Terry Jones' mother, like, can't believe what she's seeing, and she's just appalled, shocked and appalled. But I mean, is it, is this just sort of like a comment on censorship and kind of our puritanical attitudes to nudity, and it's just like, hey, you just put it there on the screen, and like we don't care.
Maybe.
We're just challenging all sorts of ideas.
I can't say I really thought much of it being there. I suppose it probably is quite a big conscious decision on the parts of the people making this film in 1979. But watching it now, it never really struck me as like, ooh, a naked woman, ooh, how unusual. I
think it is still unusual, though. In a mainstream sort of film that's aiming for normal sort of... If it was a little, like, 70s European film, then you expect it,
Well, yeah, but this is
an art film or something.
By 70s standards, this is the equivalent of, an R-rated comedy now. Like a Seth Rogen.
You wouldn't get that in
rom-com.
A Seth Rogen comedy. You wouldn't.
Yeah,
get
you
that
would.
In a Seth Rogen. No, you wouldn't.
Didn't you watch Long Shot? It had a fucking cum shot in it.
A what? Sorry.
A cum shot. Seth Rogen like jizzes all over his face by mistake. It's like Something About Mary all over again. You absolutely would just get matter-of-fact nudity in a film like that. Of course you would.
I think you did in Forgetting Sarah Marshall with what's his name? The actor just drops his towel and is just completely naked for a scene.
A man being naked isn't the same.
Well, yeah, I think
yeah,
the only reason you wouldn't get female nudity in that sense would be for fear on the part of the filmmakers for appearing to be gratuitous and sexist by just having a naked woman in their film for no reason. I think that is all that would actually be holding them back.
This is what I'm questioning in this scene, the fact that her nipples are covered quite deliberately. Like, I'm just thinking, was the censorship rules, you can't show nipples, like, okay, that's not allowed. Bit of cleavage is fine, but you can't show the nipples. And so they go, okay, yeah, we covered the nipples, there you go. But then had her completely naked otherwise. I don't know, that might be just a little
wouldn't
jab
surprise me,
by them.
Yeah, maybe. It certainly evokes religious artwork as well. And I suppose it'd be a bit weird if she came out with a fig leaf covering her downstairs. So.
Anyway, after that, all of a sudden Brian finds himself with a load of followers, and then he's captured, isn't he? And he's just sort of put in the line for the crucifixion, having a big crucifying session, and then Pontius Pilate is going to free one of the people, and people are mocking him how he has a speech impediment.
Mm-hmm. That whole bit, the whole Pontius Pilate bit, we have the first scene setting up the whole speech impediment, biggest, dickest thing. And then this second scene where they're addressing the crowd. I think it works as a gag, but it just, like, they try and make the gag 24 times. And you can, like, just make the gag 11 times and it's fine. That's the comedy rule of 11, I like to call it. But yeah, it's just, it just drags on a bit too long, these whole bits. Although it is funny, and I like Michael Palin plays it well.
Is the biggest, dickest bit funny?
I like it.
Yeah, I'm okay with that. Like the not necessarily.
The joke there is? Correct me if I'm wrong. The joke there is that a guy has a name that sounds like Big Dick.
Yeah. What more do you need? Right. But the sketch is that the guards are trying not to laugh, and Pilate doesn't get it. But it goes on too long, really. But that's fine. I like that as a thing.
I think it's an extremely weak part of this film, honestly. The only thing I find remotely funny with that character is at the end when they're shouting people they want to be set free that are made up, and then one of them says, free Brian, and then the guy goes, oh yeah, that's a good one, let Brian go or whatever, and then he's like, oh, for fuck off. But then it's the way that, oh, actually, there is a Brian in there. Oh, is there? Okay. Like, I find that funny because it's all a bit kind of, there's a lot of understated performance about it, and it's not quite as like overt and just like, ha, you talk funny. I mean, I know that's all Terry Jones is doing as well, doing a silly voice, but it just, I don't know, it just feels very weak to just have a guy being like, hello, I Pontius Pilate, and I can't pronounce my word, I can't do my words properly.
But I think that is part of the joke as well, that it is this historical figure who is normally treated with such sort of reverence and like, oh, this is a big name in the whole story of Christ, and they are just sort of doing him as like a silly voice comedy character. I think that is part of the joke.
Oh yeah, completely. I just don't find it funny.
What did Pontius Pilate actually do in the story of Christ? Like, his name rings a bell.
Yeah, he washed his hands of the whole thing. Didn't want to get involved.
Oh, really?
Really? See, I'm going off of Jesus Christ Superstar here, and I'm worried that perhaps it's not the most accurate portrayal of the story.
So yeah, I think it is just, to take that figure from, who is, I don't know if there's any other, obviously Jesus is in the film, but I guess Pontius Pilate is the only other sort of real life, put that in quotations, figure that's here.
Yeah.
So I like it as like a conceit that he's doing this. He's going to spare one person, they're making fun of him. Someone has to, I think if it were, maybe it's editing, I don't know, maybe it's because I don't care about Judith. I feel like that could work really well as a climax, but it just doesn't. It just kind of fizzles out. And she's trying to get like the group galvanized to do something, and they're just, again, discussing about doing something rather than actually doing it. I like all of that, but I don't know if it works well together.
I like the plot beats, like you say. I think the end of this film is very unsatisfying, and I think it comes down to Python's not really being very good at plot and narrative particularly, but obviously that wasn't what they were going for as a primary thing. I think the satire and the sort of concept of the ending is great, but I don't know, it's just not a very satisfying conclusion to a story for me. Certainly not when they sort of try and gloss over the impact of the whole thing by just having a funny song. As wonderful a song as it is, it's probably the shining crown jewel in Eric Idle's music career.
Cheer up, Brian. You know what they say? Some things in life are bad. They can really make you mad. Other things just make you swear and curse. When you're chewing on life's gristle, don't grumble, give a whistle. And this'll help things turn out for the best. Aye. Always.
Always forget that Always Look on the Bright Side of Life is from this film, because it's such a good example of a song or something from a film just entering the pop culture lexicon, as something on its own terms. I think a lot of people probably aren't even aware that that song is from that film.
I don't think I was before, when I was maybe a young teen and I knew the song from general culture, but I'd never seen the film. Yeah, and then you watch it and you're like, oh, that's what it's from.
I think a lot of people watching the film for the first time now probably think, oh, they're using that song. And there's probably a lot of people who think, oh, I wonder if that's from this film or if they're just... it's... Anyway, I don't even know what the point is. It's a great song.
It's transcended its position.
Transcended, that's the word.
Its source. And it is interesting that that's happened. And it's strange. Well, I guess you maybe not feel the same way, but it's strange how satisfying an ending it is. Because it is just the Monty Python, well, we don't know what to do here, so let's just do something a bit odd. But it works, and it's that song that nails it. It's because that song you do kind of just go out going, fuck it.
I think
it's very much a kind
Yeah.
of fuck whatever the fuck. Go on.
I think I don't know what it is. I think it would have worked for me more like if we'd seen the kind of really bleak moment where Brian like dies out on the cross, and then Eric Idle had sort of started singing it like, "Come on, guys, let's have a sing song," like after he died or something. I think I'd find it more satisfying.
Well, I think sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't work. I think Alan's summed it up really well for this. It is strange how sort of it's satisfying, even though it's not.
Yeah,
really.
no, I know what you mean.
And that is Eric Idle. We've got Eric Idle to thank for that. The true hero of Monty
Yes.
Python. Everyone's favourite Python.
Bugger. Give us a grin. There you are. See? The end of the film. Incidentally, this record's available in the foyer. Someone's got to live as well, you know. Who do you think pays for all this rubbish?
I mean, look, I what is this funny because everyone hates Eric Idle or something? What, like
No, I'm sure he's some people's favourite.
Well, he is my favourite, like purely down
Well, he
to
would be your
the
favourite.
songs. The songs are such a
Yeah,
big part.
no, I agree. I think the
what's
songs resonate that are through time more than most of the sketches do.
What is the best bit of The Meaning of Life? It's one of the songs. What's the second best bit of Meaning of Life? It's the other song. What else do you remember from that film? Well, people reference the Mr. Creosote scene, but it's not funny or good. You can forget everything else in that film. It doesn't have any lasting power or anything. What's the best thing in Life of Brian? It's probably Always Look on the Bright Side of Life as a song, to be honest. It's even that opening number's pretty good song, even though it's a weird decision and a bit out of place and what have you.
What's the best thing about One Foot in the Grave?
Oh, yeah.
Theme song.
Infinite Monkey Cage.
What's the best thing about Casper the Friendly Ghost?
And that's why Spam-A-Lot is everyone's favourite thing that Monty Python did, because it was just loads of Eric Idle music, right?
Yeah.
Is it actually? I should really listen to the soundtrack. Did he just write a load of songs for it?
No, he just used all the old songs.
God's sake, Eric Idle.
There is a couple of new ones in there.
I'm glad they didn't show Brian dying. I think that would have been a bit too much of a dark note to end on. Obviously, it is a dark note to end on. It's a bunch of people up on a crucifix who are going to die slow and painful deaths. But if we'd have seen that, I think it would have been a bit too dark.
I'm not remotely surprised that we don't. I think personally I would like it a lot more. I think I'd get more of a sense of, finite conclusion. And then the song would be like a little pick-me-up after you've had that bleakness, but
I think they could have done something to wrap up Brian's character arc, if there is such a thing in this film. Like, one of the last bits of dialogue we hear in the film, other than the singing, is someone say, "Oh, come on, Brian," and I think he sort of... It's not a very good shot. I think he's starting to smile, and he's sort of like going along with the song, and it's kind of nice because he's spent pretty much all of the film worrying. He's been chasing Judith around, but he really doesn't want to get too involved in things. He's quite a meek chap and never smiles. And I quite like that at the end, he's going to die, but this song's quite nice. He's gonna cheerfully sing along to it. But again, I wish they'd made more of a point of that, if that was indeed the point.
I think the song's interesting as well, because whilst it has utterly transcended this film, it's kind of lost its original meaning. I think a lot of people, as happens a lot with songs and music, where there's like a satirical element to it, it's like it's just shed all depth and meaning, and it's just taken at face value. So like Randy Newman's I Love LA, for example, is a famous example because it's a quite scathing criticism of LA and LA culture, commenting on homelessness and things like that prevalent in the city, but he sings I Love LA.
People going on the
But he sings that he loves LA.
LA culture's pretty bad, but I love it.
You sound different today, Randy. A bit deeper.
Yeah. It's got a cold. It's got a bit of a cough.
Got the oh. Well, good luck. Yeah, I think it's just my point is that that song is used as like the official anthem of the some LA sports team, and it's become adopted as like an anthem of LA, and people love it as LA brilliant, even though it's like criticizing LA. And I think this song is that exact same phenomenon where the joke is kind of like how ridiculous it is to have an attitude like that. I don't think Eric Idle means it sincerely. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it is meant very sincerely, like, oh, it could always be worse. But I think they're kind of taking the piss. But it's become
if you listen
adopted.
to the lyrics, I mean, everyone knows the "always look on the bright," like the chorus, but like the verses are "life's a piece of shit when you look at it, life's a laugh and death's a joke. It's true. You'll see it's all a show, keep them laughing as you go. Just remember that the last laugh is on you." It's all stuff like that. I don't know if I think the chorus sticks in people's minds, and then I think
that's it.
They don't think about the verses, and then when they hear it, it's like, oh, okay.
But that's it. It's become like a football anthem and stuff. Do you know what I mean? It's become like it's been adopted very sincerely because, like you say, all these people just remember the chorus and go, "Oh well, cheer up," and it's like.
I think the important part, I think the important thing about it, and this is not necessarily as obvious, but what they're not saying is, hey, it's okay, we're going to a better place, and, we'll all be in heaven or whatever. It's saying, like, we're going to be dead soon. Yeah, it's a bad way to go, but then we're dead, and there's nothingness, so it doesn't matter. And nothing really matters, so we may as well just enjoy it while we're here. And it's I think that's one of the more distinctly anti-Christian messages in the film, even though it doesn't necessarily the one that gets played, as such.
I really like how intrinsically born out of Eric Idle's character at the end it is as well. I always forget that his character is just doing that the whole way through, the kind of, oh, well, sun's out, and
it's a different character.
Falling out. Is it?
Yeah. It's just because
is it really?
Which is a bit of a fuck up, but like because it shouldn't.
Well, it shouldn't be. Yeah,
that character, because they want the gag of him being taken down because he says he's Brian and he gets away.
Oh, you're right.
But then they're like, oh shit, we need Eric up there to do the song.
Shit, yeah.
So they just have another bloke and just put a different wig on him, and he does the same voice.
That's Eric showing his. His shortcomings as a performer there. Maybe if they'd thought these things through in a bit more detail, then the film would have been successful. And there'd still be people talking about it now.
Okay, let's put some numbers on it then. Calvin, you go first.
Well, I'm a big fan. I think it is the strongest of Monty Python's feature films. That might not be saying a lot. I'm more of a fan of the Flying Circus TV show myself. But one of my favourite episodes of that actually is where they just do a 30-minute episode where they try to do like a continuous narrative throughout the whole thing, where Michael Palin's a cyclist going around getting into scrapes and stuff, which I quite like. Anyway, Life of Brian is great and very funny, and I probably watch it every couple of years. I don't think it diminishes value on repeated viewings as much as I'm sure Sol is about it. And I hate coming on this show and talking about comedies with Sol because it's all this same bloody thing. And maybe one day we'll get onto some Eddie Murphy comedy or something like that. And
we've done plenty of them.
Have some revenge.
Why do you think I like Eddie Murphy? That's Alan.
Well, no, you'd probably like, I don't know what you like. Anyway, it's 8 out of 10 from me.
I like Windy City Heat, or whatever it's called. Windy City Heat, let's do that. It's a funny film. Let's do Borat. I like mean-spirited comedy where real people are having mean things done to them.
I think that says a lot about you. And as it is Easter, you should really perhaps think about forgiving or something.
Yeah, well done, Calvin.
Yeah.
That was like you heard the words coming out of your mouth as you said them, and it was great. What did you give it, Calvin? Have you rated it? I didn't even.
I gave it an 8.
Is that all?
Well, yeah.
I thought you were going to go 9 or 10 on this, honestly. I'm surprised.
I mean, this isn't like, Way Out West or, Charlie Chaplin, but it's good.
Well, I'll jump onto that. I mean, I don't know why you're picking on me, saying I'm being mean about your comedy. I think I've been quite nice about it. I've said I want to slag it off and hate it because people are annoying with it who love it too much
I
and
don't know
can't.
who these people are. Anyway, it's alright.
There's loads of them. You encounter them all the time.
Never in my daily life do
Well,
I
yeah,
encounter people.
Maybe not
quoting
in your
Monty Python.
not in your Twitter sphere, your little liberal bubble down in that London.
No.
But out there in
But
the
in
real
working
world,
class
where
Manchester, everyone.
where there's people who voted Brexit and stuff, they're all quoting Monty Python because John Cleese thinks Brexit's good and foreigners are ruining the UK. So anyway, I think, as I've said, I think it's impossible to sincerely take real issue with this film because it is very funny, intelligent, not entirely, but a lot of it is very funny, intelligent stuff. And it's not really the film's fault if a lot of it's dated badly because it was so successful and lasted the test of time to the point that it's been overplayed. I can't listen to Nirvana anymore and the Beatles that much anymore either. It's the same thing. Like, the Beatles produced wonderful music, but I've heard it too much. So, yeah, I think its only legitimate shortcomings, really, is that it's trying to be a narrative film, and I don't think the narrative is necessarily as strong as it might be or holds up. So I give it a very strong, solid 7 out of 10.
Good God.
What? Is that too low for you?
No. It was much higher than I thought it was going to be.
Well, there you go. Yeah, I don't know why you think I like this film. I think it's, again, I agree. I think it's Python's best film.
Yeah, I mean, I concur with most of what you just said there, really. I have had to apply a certain lens to watch this in a modern context and try and see it without the cultural weight that now comes with it, I suppose. With that in mind, I gave it an 8.
Oh, well. Highest rated Easter film that we've looked at on Diminishing Returns.
That's true.
Yeah, it beat out Left Behind and God's Not Dead. 2 films which may very well be in IMDb's bottom 100 of all time list, so Left Behind certainly is.
So what are you guys doing for Easter this year?
I'm going to go out and buy a load of Easter eggs the day after Easter, assuming they won't have sold very well. Actually, no, people are going to panic buy Easter eggs, aren't they?
Need to buy them now.
Yeah, shit. Well,
Quick. Buy them all.
I'll probably sit at home and eat an Easter egg in one sitting and just lament the fact that I'm going to gain copious amounts of weight on lockdown because I'm just in that attitude of like, I don't give a fuck anymore. It's not.
I went for a jog this morning. I have the opposite effect. I've been eating well. I've been quite the active chappy.
My mental health shot to pieces. I'm just like, I just want to eat a bag of Wotsits.
This is what you've always dreamed of.
Yeah.
A virus infecting the world, and yeah, you love this stuff.
Yeah. But, then there's all the other stuff in other people. That's my problem. I actually care about other people. That's the problem.
What?
I know. I know. I wish I didn't. If I
Who?
didn't.
Know about
Name
that.
one.
Yeah.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed the show. Thank you again to all our Patreon supporters who voted for this film to be the subject of the episode. If you would like to help out the show, do consider going to patreon.com/dimreturns, where you can support us for just $1 a month. And for that, you get to help us choose what sort of episodes we're going to be doing in the future,
But also you get extra content in the form of Diminisodes, which are sort of mini episodes, usually reviews of new releases, sometimes just weird little conversations that we have. But lots of extra content, just $1 a month. Do go there and help us out. And do please join us next week when we have a very special episode with 2 special guests. We are looking at the film This Is England and the TV series that followed it. And we have an interview with Thomas Tagoose and Andrew Ellis, 2 of the stars of that film. And big thanks to Joe Farrer, friend of the show, who helped sort that out for us. It's not what you know, it's who you know in the podcasting game, I tell you what. Do join us for that next week, and we hope you enjoyed the show.